This is a short report on Canberra, but I want to just give you a word from the Lord. I believe we're in a time of Saul to David. What we saw yesterday, right behind me, they say there was something like 800,000 to 1.2 million, and also in front of where I'm standing, right along the lawn between the old and new parliaments. It was so busy. And for me, the Saul to David began here in the new parliament in 2004 when the Lord spoke those words. And I believe it has a lot to do with what we witnessed here yesterday and in the last few days. In 2 Samuel chapter 3 verse 1, it said there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And there was a contention between the old and the new. But I believe the Spirit of the Lord is really moving in what we saw yesterday. There was really no trouble despite being such a large crowd. I think there was one situation just behind us and that was it. In fact, we didn't even see any police all day. There were baptisms on this lawn at some stage. We didn't see them, but we did get to pray with the evangelists before they went out amongst the crowds. There's the Bible reading tent, which has been going for 3 days, reading the Bible non-stop. There was a man with the cross walking around, declaring true freedom comes from the cross. There's somebody else dressed as Moses saying, "Let my people go." There were so many people with different prayer assignments, worship assignments, prayer from the platform, and signs everywhere for Jesus. In fact, even though it's the day after, we've just seen another sign put on the barricade about seeking the Lord. And a couple of days ago, Hank Kuhneman in America, the prophet there, he spoke about the Lion of Judah roaring, and it would be heard through the people of Canada, Australia and the US as they shout for freedom. And so we know that God is moving, and we saw ourselves, we had the opportunity to pray with 2 policemen. The openness to the gospel is something I've never seen before. And after the last 2 years, there's a sense of unity that because people have lost so much. And in Hank Kuhneman's word, he said about a husband and wife team, and he called them Sheila and Mate. I don't know if he realises that there's slang, of course, for woman and men. But, I believe it's the other word that I put out yesterday, or the day before actually, about going out to the cave of Adullam of David and for all of God's people to rise up. But the battle is huge, and it's not all glory, and it's not all wonderful, and that's what it says. In the midst of great darkness, the glory of the Lord will fall. So we know the breath of God is breathing. God is doing something in our land. It's something unique. It is got as one pastor said to me yesterday, it has the breath of revival on it. Yet in the midst of that, there's other stuff happening. And the very first day we were here, we spoke to a young man who's been very involved in protests and so forth. And he was determined to bring the government down. And I was quite concerned by what he said. And I said, "So what are you going to replace it with?" And he said, "Oh, the Lord will provide." And I started to think again of Saul to David. And remember, Saul had disobeyed the Lord, and the Lord ripped the kingship from him. And he had David anointed. But it was many years later that David was actually able to take the throne. And in that time, God really tested David's heart. He had spears thrown at him. He was chased into the wilderness. And yet he said, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed. I will not touch the Lord's anointed." Even though the Lord had said he's no longer going to be king, I will not touch the one whom the Lord has anointed. And even when Saul died, he refused to rejoice. Again, he didn't want to do that. And I think this is a really strong warning from the Lord that in our crying out for freedom, which is right, and in the move of God, as the breath of God moves across, we need to be very, very careful we do not touch God's anointed. And this disturbance in my spirit as I spoke with this young man, there were several signs of just a few people really into anarchy, but there were some shouts against various members of the government, including our Prime Minister. And Christy Johnson gave a tremendous word about this the other day of what she's walked through. I'm not going to repeat her story. I will try to put her story, the link in the comments below. I really encourage you to read her story, to watch what she has to say. I believe that really fits with the message of Saul to David. But the first night we were here, the alarm went off in my spirit. I was so disturbed in my spirit, and that night we were evacuated out of our hotel by fire trucks. And then the next day, we were safe, but then the next day, as they were debating the Religious Freedom Bill, there were fire trucks called to the Parliament behind us. And so I could just see in both of those, there was an alarm of the Spirit of God saying, yes, this is God. God is moving. Yes, the call to freedom, the shout for freedom is right. Let my people go is so right. And let's be careful how we do it, and let's not touch the anointed of the Lord. There are many hurt people here. Many have lost jobs, have lost loved ones through the mandates and everything that's taken place. Yet as we work through all of those things and release forgiveness and cry out for freedom, that this international globalist agenda be broken off us, we need to do it with honour. You know, when Moses went before Pharaoh, he just said, let my people go. He didn't attack Pharaoh. And this was the thing with David. He didn't attack Saul. And he became stronger in it. Because dishonour, even if the person's done really badly wrong, activates Leviathan and gives the enemy opportunity. And those of us that are in ministry, we know very often people don't understand what you're doing, they don't understand why, they disagree with you, and they start to come against you. And I've seen, sadly, that too often, where people have done that to us, and as you release forgiveness and you walk through the pain of that. But I've seen that hasn't ended well, and so for them. So I just want to encourage you. The Lion of Judah is roaring. And one of the reasons he's roaring is the dragon is moving as well. And this is the danger right now, is that Australia has China beckoning at the door. And if, as was chanted here yesterday, get rid of the government, then are we going to get a government that knows how to deal with China? And this is the alarm, the fire truck warning. Are we able to handle the threats of China when we are disunited as a country, mainly because of the mandates, but also because we now just want to overthrow the government? So we need to really pray according to God's laws and ways. And I'm just so encouraged by what David walked through before he became king. You know, he could have easily taken Saul out. He could have easily taken Saul, it says he cut the robe of his garment. And then when he got close, he was like very repentant. But the transition from Saul to David, there was 3 anointings over David. And it says it was a long war. And Saul can often represent our flesh, and David representing our spirit. And so it's a change of admin, the change of the way we think. And only God can rip that apart. And we know many revivals have been stopped by the wagging tongues of man. And so the prophetic voices are right. There's like all these jigsaw pieces happening at the moment. There is the prophetic voices saying, God's voice is in this. But there's also the word of caution because China's at the door and we need to be very wise. We don't need a worse situation. God is definitely here. As I said, we prayed for the police and we had divine encounters. I had one situation happen yesterday. We were just to the side here, and which is sort of right in between the two Houses of Parliament. And when we were in worship, even though we couldn't hear, they had a stage in front of each house. And we were in the middle and like intercessors standing in the gap. And there was a time when I turned the songs off because we had some beautiful music going and the band behind us started up so loud. But I just said, it reminded me of the Battle of the Bands, that in the end times, but the soft, small sound of heaven would really release and defeat the enemy's loud sounds. And we saw that happen, and we couldn't hear the main speakers for quite some time. And I put the music back on, and all of a sudden we could hear it again. And it was such a reminder to me. And a lady sitting beside us, she leaned over and she said, "That is such beautiful music. You couldn't hear it very far away." She said, "Are you a church choir?" And it just gave me a reminder of that. And just going back to Saul to David, in 2017 we did a worship from Dan to Beersheba, because it says in 2 Samuel chapter 3 that the shift of the transfer of the kingdom of David from Saul to David was from Dan to Beersheba, and so we worshipped from Dan to Beersheba. And David had 3 anointings. First of all, he was anointed by Samuel, and things got worse for him. And then he was anointed by the men of Judah after Saul died, and then he was anointed by all of Israel. And so there's a progression from God's anointing to David himself being really changed and challenged, to man's recognition of his call and authority. So again, I just want to say, watch Christy Johnston's word. I do not want our nation to be vulnerable to China. Right now there's Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, and the South Pacific. And let's pray for our Prime Minister. Let's search our hearts, that the words of our mouths and the meditation of our heart be acceptable to the Lord. Let us consider that as we consider voting, but let's also pray that the embers, the spark of revival, will not be snuffed out by division and people's speaking against it. I'm very thankful for what God has done here, and for those He's brought here. The gospel was preached from the stage, prayer was stated, even though Hoodie's life was threatened if he prayed again from the stage. And I thank the Lord for His courage to stand on His convictions. And so I guess I've just presented you with a whole lot of jigsaw pieces. They might sound opposite, but they're not. In God, He does many things at the one time. So I just wanted you to relook at that story from Saul to David, that God is bringing His kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. God bless you.